Audible is my road trip companion.
It's kind of my quiet alone time.
Audible is a routine for me.
It's like a fun night school for adults.
I could easily be seduced into locking myself in a place where I do nothing but listen to books.
I never was interested in historical fiction before, but I'm obsessed with it now.
There are a lot of classic and big titles that I feel like I've missed out. Since I don't have time to read, might as well listen.
If I want to catch up on the news or history or learn what's going on in the world, I can download a book and listen to it.
Because I listened to her story over and over again, I made the decision to go ahead and follow my own dream, which was to help other veterans.
I think there's like 180 books in my library now. It changes your perspective. It makes you a different person. It's true. It's so true.
Download Audible and start listening today.
Hi, I'm Jade Chang, author of The Wens versus the World. Thank you all for tuning in to the 25th annual Festival of Books and our virtual event, Fiction. All you need is love. This panel features Heather Cox and Jessica Morgan, national best-selling co-authors of The Royal We and most recently The Air Affair, as well as Kevin Kwan, international best-selling author of Crazy Rich Asians and his new release, Sex and Vanity. Please remember to support your local independent bookstores during this festival. Copies of The Air Affair and Sex and Vanity and all of their other books are available from our bookselling partner, Froman's Bookstore. Heather, Jessica, Kevin, welcome.
Hi.
Hello, hello.
Hi, there you all are. So I want to start with saying that I loved both of these books. They were so fun to read. I haven't really been reading much for pleasure recently, so these were definitely a real pleasure. And I also want to start with saying I want to congratulate all of us in LA, but especially Jessica, because I know that she's a very loyal fan for the Dodgers win.
Yay, thank you. Yeah, if we hadn't won last night, we would be playing game 7, like literally right now. So it's for the best for everyone involved that
yes.
we wrapped up last night, because I would be very distracted. Yes, I'm thrilled. It's like the best day of my life.
Hooray. And there's a big baseball component in The Air Affair too, surprisingly, for a book about the British royal family. And I'm wondering if you want to maybe start us off with giving Heather and Jessica, whichever one of you usually takes point on this, if you want to give us just a little overview of the book, just so we're all on the same page here.
Sure. Well, the Air Affair is the sequel to The Royal We, which was a romance novel that we wrote that is, I would say, loosely based on Prince William and Kate Middleton, although obviously some parts are a little more tightly yoked to their real story than others. And so it's about an American, which interestingly enough, we wrote and published this novel at least a year before Meghan Markle and Harry met. So our protagonist is American. And she goes to Oxford for a study abroad year, and she meets a guy, falls in love with him, and he is sort of our analog for Prince William. That's his position in the family. And the first book sort of takes you through their courtship, the ups and the downs, and like the different way that it can affect you and the people around you when you fall in love with somebody. It's not just about the impact their relationship has on our central characters, Bex and Nick. It's also about the ripple effect. Like, what effect does it have on their friendships? Can you even maintain a friendship? What effect does it have on their siblings? And so we take the book all the way through there, and then spoiler, which, it's on the cover. They get married. And well, we just sort of, our log line for the sequel is the continuing adventures of Bex and Nick and what it is now that, you've married into this royal family. What do you do? What does that look like? And how can you maintain any kind of private normalcy or private life? Or how can you go through private personal struggles when you live your life in public, which is actually something that's been really interesting because we've seen lately in our own pop culture, we've seen Chrissy Teigen, talking about, she was so joyful about her pregnancy and she shared it so much on social media, and she took us all on that ride with her. And then when she tragically lost it, she, when she lost that baby boy, she had to kind of share the other side of it. And I think it was interesting to see how she navigated that as part of her own healing and as part of empowering other people to talk about those experiences. So anyway, it was just interesting to have such a recent real life analog to that kind of a scenario, and like how as a public figure you can possibly live your life with any modicum of privacy and hold on to any of those private joys and pains for yourself.
Yeah, and I love how you talked about love stories as being, really not just between the two lovers. The ripple effects kind of, go out into the family, the community. And Kevin, I feel like this book is very much about that. Do you want to give us just a quick overview of Sex and Vanity? Such a great title.
So I can try, but I'm just going to first say that I am the worst person to describe any of my books, and Heather did such a beautiful job with hers. So I'm going to apologize in advance because I suck at this. But Sex and Vanity is about, the protagonist is a girl named Lucy Chang Churchill. And we meet her when she is 19 years old, and she's been invited to a childhood friend's wedding on the island of Capri. This is her first trip alone. She's traveling with her cousin, who's actually her chaperone, and they get to the island of Capri, and they arrive at their amazing 5-star hotel, and they're led to their room, and they open the shutters and discover that they do not have an ocean view. And of course, that enrages them, and they're kind of pissed off about it. They go downstairs, they're discussing it, they're trying to figure out how to finagle getting a better room with a view. And that's when they run into a man by the name of George Zhao and his mother, Rosemary. And at that point, the Zhaos offer to trade their rooms, which have views, with Lucy and her cousins. And the setup is, you might know, very familiar because it's an homage to A Room with a View, one of my favorite novels and books of all time. But of course, I take it into much weirder and crazier places because the book ends up in New York. And it's really a love affair, with New York and Capri at the heart of it. How's that for a terrible description?
That was not terrible. It was excellent. And honestly, I should apologize because when I was on book tour, the thing I hated the most was having to give descriptions of the book.
Synopsis,
and I always hated it. And I always felt so grateful and relieved whenever whoever was running the panel would deftly summarize everyone's book in a single sentence. So sorry,
well, that
guys.
did not happen tonight. So I was.
I did not do that for you. But I appreciate you all willing to do it for the readers. So I know that the kind of topic of the panel is love stories, and I feel like we all have these kind of formative love stories that we maybe hear at a young age that we sort of decide are this is the perfect love story. This is the way, this is the way I want love to unfold, or just this is what I love to see in a love story. And I'm wondering whether you guys have, what was kind of the first love story that you remember loving? Maybe let's start with Jessica.
Well, I was going to say this is apt because I actually think mine is A Room with a View, the movie version, although I have read the book. But I saw that at a very formative age, let's put it that way. And, it's so lush. It's really romantic. Everyone in it is so beautiful. They're in Italy, and she's engaged to this kind of uptight guy, and she falls in love with this romantic man on a vacation. So yeah, I think that was mine. And in fact, in our book, Freddie, who is our protagonist's, he's like the Prince Harry, basically. It's named Freddie in part because that is the name of one of the characters in Room with a View. So this is all really coming in full circle.
Ah,
Freddie Honeychurch.
Yes.
Yeah. Who in my novel is Freddie Churchill.
Oh, perfect.
So, yeah.
It's also just a cute guy name.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think what mine would be. Mine are two, I think, very different ones. I would say my first one was probably, and I don't know that people would count this as a love story, but I will for now, which would be Anne of Green Gables. And I'll count it as a love story because it also does touch on all the things that I love in love stories, which is it's a love story between Anne and Matthew and Marilla as a family. It's between Anne and her bosom friend, Diana Barry. And of course, there's Anne and Gilbert. And I think one of the reasons I loved that story, that just beyond like the warm, different feelings of family and how Anne sort of makes this family and how they open up for her, is also because Anne's super smart and sassy and she never gives that up for anybody. And in fact, that's what Gilbert really likes about her. And I think I don't know if I would have, if it's correct to say I recognize that in myself, but I certainly appreciated and responded to it. Also, she has red hair. And also her name is, my middle name was Anne. And I used to ask my mother, because of that book, if I could just please start writing it with an E on the end, because that's the only appropriate way to do it. And my mother was like, that's cute. No, you can't do that.
And was your love more for the book version or for the TV series version?
I would say probably both concurrently, because I started watching the TV series and I was like, oh, I want to read. So I was sort of doing them both at the same time, if that makes any sense. Yeah. You know, I feel like that's a slightly more elegant choice than my other, which was Sweet Valley High.
Wait, what was the love story in Sweet Valley High that you loved?
I don't even know. All of it. Probably between the twin sisters, but you know, I don't know. It's just that the whole thing is they're all dating different people and they're all like, it wasn't so much the love story that, you know, but it was the drama of the different relationships and the soapiness of it. You know, I do love a drama. So I guess maybe I want my own relationships to be a little bit dramatic. Maybe I'm learning something about myself right now.
All panels are really therapy sessions. That's the thing.
Okay.
Yes. Kevin, what about yours? Was it A Room with a View?
I mean, I have to go back even earlier to the fairy tale, to Cinderella, quite frankly.
Oh.
You know, I remember as a kid, we had all these old fairy tales from Hans Christian Andersen and Brothers Grimm and people like that. And, you know, I think Cinderella was the kind of iconic story for me, you know, of a poor lost girl who finds her prince. And it's a recurring theme in all my books. You know, in Crazy Rich Asians, there's Rachel Chu who finds her prince. And of course, in Sex and Vanity, there's Lucy Tang Churchill who finds her prince, who I should not reveal who it is at this point, in case some people have not read the book yet.
No spoilers. We don't want any spoilers.
Obvious. Yeah.
Right. Do you think there's something about that sort of like, do you think it's the rags to riches, or do you think it's the rescue? Like, what do you think it is that feels so romantic to you?
I think it's a combination of both, but it's also the story of, you know, a deserving person who is mistreated in the beginning, who is rewarded in the end, you know, for her sacrifice, for being so mistreated by, you know, the ugly stepsisters and the stepmother. You know, in the case of Rachel Chu, you know, it's all everyone in Singapore, you know, that hates on her. So yeah, I think there's this thing about how you have to suffer first, and maybe that's a very Asian Chinese thing, where it's like you have to suffer first, and then you will be rewarded with love and happily ever after. But you know, one has to have that heartbreak first.
Yes. Does that mean, this may be a little too personal, but does that mean that when you love someone, you think of it as like yourself rewarding them?
You know, I've never thought of that before like that. I'll have to think about that. And let me get back to you on that.
Okay. Well, what do you guys think that people are generally looking for in a love story? Like, I guess what I'm really asking is, when you write a love story, do you feel like, are there things where you're like, gotta give them a happy ending? You know, are there things that you feel like you have to give? Heather, do you want to start?
Yeah, I don't know if I think, you know, because we talked about that quite a bit, especially because our first book has an ending that we affectionately refer to as the cutting edge ending, which is that you don't necessarily know what happened when they woke up on the morning of their wedding day and walked down the aisle. Because we steal things in a way that what we decided was we were going to go with the emotional ending, which was that these two people have chosen each other come hell or high water, and they're united. And it doesn't really matter what happens the next day at the church. That's sort of a side light. And so I guess that's one thing. And by the way, when I was a kid, I hated that. I was always like, no, I need to know if they landed the Panchenko, you guys, this is unacceptable. And now as an adult, I've kind of come into understanding that some stories really do, it's about the emotional conclusion. And I think what you want is something that does feel emotionally satisfying and emotionally earned. And recognizing that everybody's definition of a happy ending could be different. You know, it could be somebody who doesn't end up with the person and maybe that's their happy ending. Maybe that choice and the power to make that choice is actually the positive in their story. So mostly, I think we just want to make sure that by the time somebody gets to the end of the book, they don't close it and throw it across the room and say, why the hell did I just spend all that time with those people? That ending was stupid and wasn't earned at all. So like, I think as long as you're being emotionally honest on your character's journey the whole way through, you know by the time you get to the end if what you've if you've gone the right direction.
Yes. So I really agree with you, but I also wonder if that is kind of like, as a writer, you start to feel like it's satisfying to you that you have reached an emotional conclusion. But I remember, especially when I was younger, honestly, even now, like watching movies, for example, I always loved when the movie would have an explainer at the end that was like, in 20 years, this is what happened to every single one of these people.
Yes, I love that. And we worried about it. I mean, we debated the ending of our book and we were like, do we need an epilogue? Like, are people going to get to the end and be annoyed at us that there wasn't like the walk down the aisle and all of that? And we wrestled with it. And we were like, you know, we have to just stick to our guns. It's our book and we want to be proud of it. And we hope that if we've done our job, most of the people who have stuck with us this far are going to be okay with it because they're going to feel that sigh of relief that's like, oh, okay, I loved spending time with these people and I feel like they're going to be all right. Like they're taken care of. They did the right thing. So at a certain point, you kind of just have to cross your fingers and hope that it's like child rearing. You just have to sort of hope you did it right and off it goes into the world.
I felt that way about the end of the Air Affair. Like, phew, they're going to be okay. Yeah.
Yeah. The second book, the sequel has more of a, I mean, I personally believe the first book does have a ending. I know some people felt like it was a cliffhanger. I did not think it was, but I can understand that argument. But the second one, I think, does feel very wrapped up to me.
Yeah. Nice. And Kevin, were there things that you felt like you had to give people, especially because, you know, you've written these 3 books that are such a beloved trilogy? And now that you're writing this book that is just like an out and out love story, did you feel like there was something a service you had to provide or anything?
You know, it's interesting because I never thought of it as writing a love story, quite frankly. You know, the love story is kind of a plot device in a way, but for me, I see my books really as satires, as a way to look at clans and cultures and families as a whole, and how they all revolve around each other. And then the love story is just the foil into getting to discussing these characters and showing these worlds that overlap. I'm more interested within the love story of the evolution of the character. You know, how Lucy, my character, for example, comes to really essentially learn to love herself. You know, because she starts out, we meet her at age 19 in a place where she is very unaware. You know, there's no self-awareness there. And which is why when she first meets George Zhao, she is instantly attracted to him and completely repelled by him, and spends much of the book trying to deny her love for him. And so I wanted to see that arc of what happens in her evolution. And so much of it is wrapped up in her identity, in her own racial identity, being, you know, she's a biracial character. So she has to struggle with that. And George, being this very virile, sexualized Chinese man, is something that is so beyond her ability to process at age 19, you know? So she has to wrestle with her own internalized racism. And so that to me are all the interesting journeys. And the love story just kind of happens. I don't know. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah,
you know?
Totally makes sense. And just so everyone knows, Lucy, basically her father is really from a very waspy family.
He comes from a waspy, blue blood, New York's high society family. And her mother, Marion, comes from just a very middle class, you know, Asian American family from Seattle.
Mhm.
So she's caught between two cultures,
Yeah.
two races, and also two classes, you know.
And she grew up feeling her father's family made her feel like she was lesser because she was Asian.
Actually, I don't think that's correct.
Okay.
It's more that
Uh-huh.
because of the circumstances, you know, she grew up and her father died at a very young age. And
Mhm.
so the mother was a single mother raising two young
Mhm.
kids in Manhattan.
Right.
And the family, the WASPy side, actually overcompensated. They drew, you know, these orphan kids in, and in their desire to make them feel as special as possible, they overdid it, and it had a reverse effect. They're wanting to protect Lucy from this waspy world and this world of privilege, and to guide them through it actually had the opposite result. You know, she has a cousin, Charlotte, who's very waspy and blonde, who is always trying to explain to people and justify, yes, Lucy is really my cousin. Even though she looks completely Chinese or slightly Chinese, we're really related. She really is a Churchill. You know, so they're going out of their ways, with very unconscious sort of racism embedded in them. They think they're being helpful, but they're not. They're actually, you know, I call it 1,000 paper cuts. You know, over the course of her youth and her teenage years, she only sees the deficiencies. She only sees her family trying to like make up to her, and not the actual positives, which is they really love her. You know,
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. But what Lucy feels through most of the book is that they have been, you know,
Totally.
seeing her
Yeah.
as less than.
Yeah.
Right.
She feels marginalized. Whether that's true or not, you know, the reader finds out lots of things towards the end of the book.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
There's a satisfying round of revelations for sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Did you, you know, for both of you in these books, the main character, you know, Bex in The Air Affair and Lucy in Sex and Vanity, they both have people, at least they see it as people kind of putting them down or seeing them as not quite being equal to their station because of their identities, right? Because Bex, because she's American, Lucy, because her mother is Chinese. And I wondered if in writing this, you know, the parts of their identities that are difficult are the parts of their identities that you guys share. And I wonder how it felt to write that.
I mean, I think for us, this is obviously like an incredibly complicated question.
Sure.
I don't find being an American to be a negative. It is very challenging sometimes, especially right now. But I think for us, one of the reasons that we made Bex an American is because it was something that we could speak to from like a lived experience. I could not write a first person narrative as a British person. I don't think we could do it. I don't think it would sound believable. And I think when it came time for Heather and I to write this book, I think we thought we had to make our protagonist an American, or I don't think we would have been able to pull off writing in her voice. That's honestly, like, that's not as profound an answer maybe as I wish I could give you, but it is sort of the technical, logistical reason it went that way.
It did at least sort of help in terms of giving her one more way of being on the outside. And so I guess from that point of view, like, and that way that helps us, you know, we can kind of tap into our own feelings, and that, like, maybe we haven't felt that way as Americans necessarily, but, you know, everybody, at the core of every good book, you find feelings that people can recognize even if they haven't recognized the situations. And so hopefully what it is just we're tapping into our universal experience of being somebody who was ever on the outside of a situation and feeling insecure about it, or feeling like you had to sort of defend your ground and not knowing how to do it. And I guess in Bex's case, it's sort of, she's sneered at a little bit because she's American, and people sort of, well, he'll never marry an American, and the American, and just like they're using it as a way to denigrate her. But, you know, we've all, in ways much bigger and ways much smaller, have had some kind of relatable experience of standing somewhere and just feeling like I just, whatever I am is being used against me, and I'm kind of just trying to figure out how small to make myself or how big to make myself in response to that. This is not a story of hardship, by the way, but like I went to high school in Canada. I was one of 2 Americans in my class. And boy, did I hear it every time, anything came up about America, I was asked to answer for it. Or every time, I remember one time we were doing a class on, because we were doing Canadian history in grade 11. And it was like, my teacher was like, okay, we're going to watch a movie about the history of the Canadian Navy. And the kid who sat in front of me was like, oh, so after those 5 minutes is up, what are we going to do with the rest of the class? And everybody laughed. And then the teacher spent the rest of the class basically explaining about well, we don't all like America and we don't all have to have like looking at me as if I'd said it. Again, not really a hardship, but like when you're 16 and you're sort of like, I don't know how to respond to this. Like, I don't really feel like I'm the embodiment. I guess I'm the embodiment of something that you really don't like. And I don't know how big or small to make myself in response to this and how to handle it. And so I guess, whether it's a minor thing like that or major things like unconscious bias, institutionalized racism, all of that, like people have stood in that spot and thought, I don't know what to do. I don't know how I feel and I need to figure it out. And so in Bex's case, being American was just a little part of that.
Yeah, nice. And it always, I think, anytime, I think one of the reasons, for example, that like Korean dramas have been so popular all over the world is because there are kind of more, they play on these strictures in society, and so things become more dramatic, right? When there are more kind of things to overcome, they really, the drama really pops. And so I think having these characters be outsiders in this way also really helps. Kevin, I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to say about that at all.
Well, I mean, there are plenty of outsider characters in my book and in the current novel, and so much of it is inspired by my experience, sort of as an outsider in New York. I lived in New York for 20 years, and I was, frequently invited to go uptown. I had good friends who lived on the Upper East Side who came from these very establishment New York families, so I was able to peek behind the curtain, so to say, and to really go into these inner sanctums of these really, truly private elite worlds, the private clubs of New York, the private eating clubs, very private parties. And I was always the outsider, but it was so fascinating to me to be able to see that and to see the rules of engagement and how these people behaved and the quiet, I once went to a party, for example, because I'm such an outsider. There's I don't even count, right? I'm like the fly on the wall that they can completely ignore. But I could see, for example, going to, a very posh party at a very exclusive Upper East Side Park Avenue building. And you would see these girls who were the native New Yorkers who'd all gone to the top private schools. And then you would see a new girl enter the scene, for example. And I literally would notice the way like the ranks would close and they would shut out this girl. Because they hadn't grown up with her. She hadn't gone to the same kindergarten, preschool, private schools that they all did. It doesn't matter that she was an award-winning, acclaimed, person, incredibly successful. It didn't matter. She wasn't to the manner born in that way. So for me, that was fascinating to see, and to see all, the hidden rules and codes that existed. And that's what I really put into the novel.
Yeah, and you do such an amazing, precise job of it. Especially, I found so in this book, Kevin, whenever a new character is mentioned, he gives the lineage of their schooling in parentheses right after their name. And it's so, I've had experiences much like yours, Kevin, I think, where because of jobs and because of friend groups that I've been a part of and things like that, I have gotten to be a little bit on the outside of or on the edges of some of these like fabulous worlds. And it is so fascinating to watch. And also the precision and the humor with which you kind of like put together these educational lineages is really amazing, and I thought was just like such a good, like needly bit of satire.
Thank you. Yeah, every character that's introduced in my book, everyone that makes an appearance gets their entire educational CV, from preschool to grad school, whatever. And I really did a lot of intense research, for some places, some countries that I didn't even know. I would talk to people saying, what is the top school to go to? What's the top preschool to go to? Because I really wanted to play that game in terms of introducing these characters. I also created sometimes interesting, irregular biographies. To the point where literally people would call me up and go, okay, what's the deal with this character? Why did she go to such a great private school and end up at such a shitty college? Like, what happened in between? I have to know, So I feel like I was able to successfully do that and create like true biographies of people just through their schools.
And that's got to feel really good because you're like, oh, you didn't just read my book, you read my book. Like, you didn't pay attention.
Yeah.
Well, there was that person who went to, I can't remember the very exclusive private schools, but they were, and then Esalen ended up being kind of the finishing point of their biography.
Yeah.
That's a great job.
Yeah.
They went total new age, after grad school. Yeah. Or in the middle of grad school.
The girl who grew up in LA, I went to some of those schools, and you also got that so correct. And
I went to school in LA. I need
Wilbur
to
Street Avenue Elementary School, Portola Junior High School, where I went, Taft High School, and then CSUN, which I think the Cal State system is amazing and one of the best things about California. And I think CSUN is a great school, but I also think that in the context of this novel, she was a real disappointment to her parents.
Jade, you nailed it. You totally nailed it. So,
but that was so good. Like, what was the research that got you that? Like, did you know somebody? Did you have to ask around?
I mean, most of my characters are sort of loosely inspired by real people, so I can sort of fudge their details somewhat, because I don't ever, of course, want to actually make fun of any real people, but I use, I cheat by using real people as my inspiration, and it's pretty easy that way to sort of craft their educational lives.
Yes. Well, so let's talk about a group of people that it is very acceptable to make fun of, and which you all do liberally, which is snobs. I feel like half the humor of both of your books, which I enjoyed so much, was mocking snobbery. Why are they so fun to make fun of? Jessica, can you enlighten us on this important matter?
I mean, everybody likes to make fun of a snob. I think that's just human nature. But I also think from like a writerly perspective, it's really fun to write a snob. Like you get to channel all your own maybe snobby instincts into like one really terrible person, or maybe multiple terrible people if you're lucky. And I think there's something about it that is just really fun to write. And I think when something is fun to write, the reader enjoys reading it. So I feel like it's a little bit of like a symbiotic relationship there. I love writing a snob. I think it is enjoyable. Second only to writing giant fights, which is really my favorite thing to write, is writing like a really snobby bitch.
Yes.
I'm totally with you there, Heather. I mean, I'm sorry, Jessica. I feel like,
I'll take either one of it. Either one is fine.
Yeah, it's you're sort of living vicariously through them, because you get to create these characters that say and do things that you normally would never get a chance to do, So you let them be outrageous. But I think there's also something to me that's so fascinating about the psychology of a true snob. These are people who are so snobby that they are completely unaware of their snobism. I think the typical snob comes from a place of insecurity, right? And they're very easy to crack. But then when you meet some of these like ultra snobs that have just been, whether it's members of royal families who've, like the great aunts who've been around for decades, it's so ingrained in them, they don't even realize it. And those to me are the most fun to psychoanalyze. Where does that come from?
That's such interesting stuff from your all three Crazy Rich Asians books is just the way that they weaponize the word millionaire or billionaire against each other. And like this concept of like only $2 billion is like an embarrassing amount of peanuts. And that stuff's it's super satisfying to read. And then I just feel like psychologically, obviously you nailed it because you wrote it, but like psychologically that makes so much sense to me to hear you say that, because like, you read that stuff and you're like, oh yeah, these people have nothing, they're nowhere near touching the real world. And like, it's so far removed from reality that all we can do is, instead of being offended by it as readers, you just laugh because you're like, you guys are Looney Tunes. Do you even hear yourselves?
You have to laugh and almost pity it, just the obliviousness.
Yeah.
I think right now there's a big hate campaign going on towards Kim Kardashian, right? Because she's posting all these pictures from being at Brando Island in Tahiti that a lot of people are finding just completely so tone deaf. And to me, she's like such an amateur snob compared to some of the truly, snobby people that you've probably created and written about. The British aristocracy, like you do not get more snobby than that.
No.
That's generations of inbred snobbery, piled upon each other. And it's this very similar. There's a kinship there, between old British aristocracy and Chinese old money that I find that's so interesting.
I was just gonna say,
I can't wait to read your books.
Thank you. Like if this panel could just as easily have been like snobbery, what's that about? As much as because like our books are interconnected in all those ways.
Yeah, problems with rich people. Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Well, I once got an email from someone who said, wait, I actually wrote it. I actually cut and pasted it here. It said, I think your book is really good, but I'm just mad that the characters are so rich, so I hate it.
What?
That was the whole message. And I got it, and it made me feel bad because I never want to make someone else feel bad, but it also really made me laugh because it was just so upfront with, this person, that is how they felt, and I understand. And I don't know, how does it feel kind of writing about these, kind of like unattainable worlds and lives when the world is what the world is right now?
I mean, personally, my favorite genre, and I've said this multiple times, my favorite genre to read is rich people with problems.
Mm-hmm.
I've read all of Kevin's works, as they are some of the greatest rich people with problems books. I don't know why I enjoy it, but I just do. I think it's escapism in a sense. Schadenfreude's a little too strong, but yeah, I mean, I think it's also why I love soap operas. Like, this is what I dig. I love books about like very rich people who have terrible things happen to them. And then, it works out or whatever happens. Like, or people come into the terrible rich people's problems world and shake it up. It's my favorite genre. I think
it appreciate things a little bit. I know that sounds really like, sweet, but like when we were writing the Royal We and the Airfare, but it started in the Royal We, by the time we got to the end of that book, we were like, thank God that's not my life. Like you might think that it looks fun to be Kate Middleton or whatever, but like by the time I was just like, oh God, no, like I'm thrilled I'm not her. I'm thrilled I'm not famous. I can't imagine what that would be like. I can't imagine like, even just on a small level going on Twitter every day now, you're like, oh God, if this is coming up in like my mentions, like what are Chrissy Teigen's like? She's like an actual person with millions of followers and like who can say whatever they want. Like, and I just think you start to appreciate that, the things in your life that are smaller, sometimes those really are like the best things. And like, you don't need to live on such a giant stage in order to feel satisfied with who you are and what you have. And like, there is something very affirming about that, especially now, because as much as it hurts to write about travel, places I may never get to go again or whatever, you also sort of think, well, my life's real small right now. So thank God that I'm in an emotional and mental place where I'm like, this fine. That's fine. I can do small. I don't need it. Like this is a blessing in and of itself. Like to just have I can just go about my business, and I don't need all of that right now. I don't know.
I think it's hard coded into our DNA. I think since the very beginning of time, when we lived in caves, you know, the person or the couple that had that prime spot at the back of the cave that was the warmest, that had the biggest sort of, you know, fur pelt, that was someone you were always kind of interested in. And I think we've always been fascinated. And so you see this grand tradition, starting with all these ancient fables to even the Bible. You know, the Bible is a story of social climbing and health, quite frankly, you know, if you look at it. And in many ways, to all the grand literary traditions, from Machiavelli to Jane Austen to Trollope to Edith Wharton. Like, people are fascinated by looking at the privileged and the powerful. And it's comforting in a way, I think, for people to see these people in these powerful positions brought down, you know, humanized. It makes us feel better about ourselves, I think.
I think so.
I think
too.
that's.
But I mean, I
that's
also
the core
just
of it,
like
you know.
enjoy reading about like luxe vacations and people's fancy yachts. You know, I mean, it's kind of like why I like reading Town and Country magazine. It's very well written and snarky and funny, but also like, wow, look at this person's estate. It's beautiful. I'm just living vicariously here.
It's true. I do just love pretty things also.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you guys about, you know, you all do so much research for these books, and I almost don't know if people fully appreciate just how much research there is, you know, for the Royal We and the Air Affair. You guys actually sent me to Wikipedia several times because I was like, wait, I want to know more about like this obscure thing. For example, if there are, no, I just realized that I didn't want to spoil your book. So I just really, I think you know what
5 years. Go ahead.
it was a matter of, well, no, I don't want to spoil the Air Affair.
Oh.
But I got very interested in primogeniture laws, let's just say.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a little spoiler for sure.
Yes, exactly. But I'm curious about kind of, do you guys, my guess is that you all just actually really enjoy research. Kevin, for example, I think that you must love travel guides and travel writing. I remember just reading Crazy Rich Asians. I remember thinking, I think this guy also just wants to write a guide to food in Singapore. Like, I think that is also a big part of this book. But I'm curious, were there kind of things you were really excited to research? Were there things that really surprised you? Were there ways that the book changed, you know, in the course of research? Does someone want to, you know, it's kind of a big question. Does someone want to volunteer to jump in first?
I'll go first.
No, yeah, Kevin can go.
No. Ladies first. I actually don't do any research at all for my books. It's all very, to me, it's experiential. If I haven't been to that restaurant, if I haven't been to that place or seen the space, I can't write about it. So I really don't do any research for my books.
Embedded yourself in the place.
I'm sorry?
I said that's the deepest research. You embedded yourself.
Yeah, I guess I do physical research, but in terms of, you know, having to go into historical, you know, or research into primogeniture, stuff like that they have to do. I don't do any. I hate doing research, so I kind of cheat by just writing about stuff that I already is filled in my crazy brain, basically.
So what
I find internet rabbit holes to be a very satisfying thing to fall into, especially if I'm trying to procrastinate. So I think that's where a lot of our research happened. Like when we would be looking up, you know, okay, we got to make this person, he's got to be a duke. Let's pick a dukedom, but maybe it's not a dukedom that's current. Maybe it's one that's defunct, or like maybe we need to looking up rules of the peerage. And there's something in the Royal We, there's a reference to fish knives. And it came from, one of us was describing a play, had written something describing the place setting at Buckingham Palace for a big banquet. And the other one was like, had thought they'd seen something that they don't use fish knives anymore. And I was like, I thought they did still use fish knives. Like my dad was British and he always has his fish knives. And we actually looked it up and there's a controversy about whether you use fish knives. And we were like, well, that has a place in this book. So in the book, there's like an offhand mention about like some snarky controversy about whether it's appropriate to have fish knives. And that kind of stuff, I think, can always be like fun color. But for our books, it's interesting because the first book, we were able to fly out and do some research. We wandered around Oxford. We went to a lot of the places mentioned in the book, and it was super satisfying and wonderful, especially because there are parts of the book where we have to guess, we have to take a leap. And we felt like if we've done our homework as much as possible and we've taken the Buckingham Palace tour and we've written down our notes, what the tour guide said about all these little details and like about how the outlets match, the things, plugs are gold and outlets match the wallpaper or whatever. If we get that right, then the times when we have to fly blind and pull it out of our asses, people are going to go with us because the rest of it feels true. So we were able to do that for the Royal We, and that had to kind of carry us through the airfare because we weren't able to take a research trip. So we had to find other ways to sort of use what we knew already to give it an authentic vibe, especially because some of the settings we really were having to make up. And then some of them we just were like, we have to just do our best. And again, hope that our backlog of knowledge is going to take us where we need to go. And if we're making you close the book because you don't really think that restaurant sounds like a real thing, then maybe we didn't do our job.
No, it feels extremely authentic. Like I felt like you must have had, someone, a palace insider telling you about fish knives or something like that.
We'll never tell.
I also imagine that for anybody in these professions, I do not imagine anyone over there has found the book and read it, but let's say they did. It would be like when a doctor tries to watch Grey's Anatomy and is like, no, or like when a lawyer watches How to Get Away with Murder and they're like, that is not how you object to something in court. Like, I'm sure somebody over there is reading it and being like, these girls have no idea what they're doing. But I feel like that's okay. There's always going to be an element of that. And like, as long as those readers are always going to be fewer and further between. So as long as we get it right for the general public and they're kind of enjoying the romance and all that stuff, they're going to maybe forgive us if we kind of don't know what the Queen's private quarters would look like and had to invent it.
They don't know either.
No.
Have you not seen the pictures of the Queen's bedroom and stuff like that?
I spent a lot of time looking at those pictures. Trust me. Yes. Well, especially like
Tupperware, the folding table.
Yeah, it's like a mess. She's got a card table. Like there's all this junk, and like a very sort of like low tech heater. It's not exactly as grand as the public spaces. Yes, I spent a lot of time on the internet, like looking at the inside of buildings, which I enjoy anyway. I would do that regardless, so it was a pleasure.
Can I ask, like, what the reaction is like, to your books in England? Like, is there have any sort of royal insiders tried to reach out to you or anything like that?
Not yet.
Yeah.
We're hoping. I really, truly hope that Kate or Meghan walks outside holding it cover outward against her and like announces loudly to everyone, "This is the best book I've ever read. It's so realistic." But that has not happened yet.
No.
I think the British are not as, Americans love British royal family gossip. And I think the British are a little perplexed by our interest in it. I don't think they're as into it necessarily on the whole as a lot of Americans are. And, I think it's mostly because in the United States, British history is often taught in a sort of a soap operatic form. I think, because that's interesting bits. Henry VIII and all of his wives, a very dramatic tale. So I think we've sort of been primed to view them as dramatic fictional characters in a way that is difficult to do when the tax dollars are paying for their houses. So, I think Americans really, we love the British royal family for our rich people with problems stories. And I don't know that I think it translates.
I feel like at least one friend of Meghan Markle's must have read your book and been like, "Meghan, this really sounds like what happened with your escape to America."
I feel like it's the gag gift you buy your friend Meghan, who has just started dating a British prince, and you're like, "Oh my God, have you read this book?" Like, haha, and you give it to her as a joke, and she probably never read it, but it's like collecting dust in a box in Toronto somewhere now. But that's when she probably, if she ever had crossed paths with it, my suspicion is that like someone sent it to her like when that story broke that they were dating as
We have some questions from readers, but before we switch over to those, Kevin, I just wanted to say that as a longtime resident of Los Angeles, I really appreciate one particular footnote in your book, which was when you said that even the New York Times had to admit in 2018 that Los Angeles was the most exciting food city in America.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can I just tell you how much blowback I got from the copy editor who was fact checking my book? Like, she refused to believe it, and she found another New York Times article that contradicted that. And I was like, no. Let me tell you, and let me show you where it's published. Wow. You know, she was a New Yorker, of course, you know, but I was like, no, I don't make this up.
No, I remember that article. Ask an Angelino, and we'll all be like, yes.
Yes, totally.
Well, also because the New York Times is just, you know, love the Times, but they do not love and understand Los Angeles the way that
they have their biases. Let's say.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. Okay, so we do have a few questions from readers. Let me just pull these up. Let's see. The first one is from Catherine, who asks, Kevin Kwan, how old were you? How old were you when you first read A Room with a View? And how did you decide it was time for a fresh telling? Kevin?
I was I think I was 14 or 15 when I read it. And it was the year the movie had come out, and it sort of was kind of this groundbreaking movie. It created the whole genre of that English country house romance thing. You know, it was a huge international box office success for its time, and every cool girl in my high school was reading A Room with a View. So I wanted to get in on the action and find out why everyone was reading this. And then, of course, I completely fell in love with the story too. And what was the second part of the question? I can't remember.
Did you decide it was time for a fresh telling? A Room with a View really hasn't gotten a lot of, hasn't gotten any like Pride and Prejudice type treatment.
It hasn't. And I think that's why I thought it was overdue, that no one had done it, number one. And then, you know, I have been lucky enough to visit Capri, you know, numerous times. And I don't know when the idea first began, maybe 10 years ago, when I went there and I would observe all these romances, these week-long romances taking place on the island. Because, you know, people all come and you see, you know, a family arrive and there's a teenage girl who's like surly, doesn't want to be on vacation for her parents, you know. And by day 2, she's met all the other teenagers on the island. And then she's found like one that she's kind of interested in. By day 3, they're holding hands. She's found her little Italian boyfriend. And then by day 5, when they're all leaving the island, she's sobbing at the dock, you know? So I would see these little love stories happen over and over again on this enchanting island. I was like, this is the place to like retell a classic story, but to like really make it my own, you know, and tell this modern take on A Room with a View.
I love it. It also really made me want to go to Capri. I've never been. Okay, another question from Liz, who asks, what are some of the books and authors that have most influenced your work? Heather, let's start with you.
Oh gosh, that's a really tough one, because I don't know if I can really pinpoint one. I think, you know, in terms of my personal sense of humor and the way that I write, honestly, my dad, who was neither a book nor an author, but his sort of British sensibility and like the kinds of comedy that he would, you know, expose me to at a younger age, like Rowan Atkinson's Blackadder series, specifically the second and third ones, just sort of that very dry wit has always delighted me and really spoken to me when I'm trying to write things that are funny, that don't necessarily need to be like broadly funny. Sometimes it can just be a light twist of the knife, or just like the best chosen words delivered with a straight face, but that you sort of give you a chuckle, like that kind of stuff. And I will say, I mean, I also really enjoy, I can't necessarily say this has influenced my writing, but the Jasper Ford books, the Thursday Next series, where it's in an alternate universe and she's a literary detective, and it transpires that she has the ability to jump in and out of the pages of books, and the way that he has her interacting with literary characters who are quote unquote off camera, like if whoever's reading the book is not on that page, and just the ways that he uses wordplay with different literary tropes. Like there's a misspelling virus, and as the misspelling virus, the book is being infected with a misspelling virus, the pages that you're reading, certain words also start to be misspelled until they cure it, like little things like that. So I would say, just in terms of wanting to be just rampantly creative, he's someone that I reread to sort of make me try to look at a situation in as different a way as I can.
I did not know that was the premise of the Jasper 4 books, and now I want to read them.
They're great.
Thank you. Jessica?
I guess sort of related to my love of rich people with problems, I also love like a sprawling family epic, like a very fat book. And I will admit that Heather and I have never written a book that is not maybe too long. So that perhaps has influenced me. But yeah, I love books that span decades of a family. And I think our books do span a fairly long time period. And they have a cast of many different family members. Both of our books have a family tree in the front, which I love a good family tree book. So I think I am very influenced by sprawling family epics War and Peace is a great soap operatic family epic. If you haven't read it, you can kind of like skim all the parts where he gets like deep into Russian corn farming or whatever. But it is extraordinarily soap operatic. So from that being like kind of your highbrow example to, these aren't lowbrow, but there's a British author named Penny Vincenzi who wrote a trilogy it's the No Angels Trilogy. I talk about it constantly. And it's 3 books. They're all about 600 pages long. And it's about this family that owns a publishing company. And it starts at the turn of the century. And so it's one of those books where, you get very invested and involved in the family. And then they'll say something like, well, I got to go. Like, I'm packing for this new ship I'm going on. It's called the Titanic. And you're like, oh my God, they're getting on a Titanic. And it sort of takes you all through history. So I really do love a book that's got tons of characters, a very complicated family, and a lot of drama.
Yes. And Jessica, I actually, when you started to talk about the books you liked, I was actually thinking to myself, I have to message her after and ask her if she's read that series. And I'm glad that you have.
Isn't it the greatest though? It's so satisfying and easy. It's like, I love them. And when we first sold Row, I remember we were talking to our publisher. And she just like offhandedly mentioned that she loved those books. And I said, I love those books. And it was like a moment of understanding one another.
I love that. Yeah. And Kevin, we know you love A Room with a View, but are there other books and authors that have really influenced you?
Absolutely. Like a lot of the great satirists, Dominic Dunn, Tom Wolfe, Edith Wharton. I find her work is so relevant and timeless even today. Like the way she was looking at New York society in the turn of the century, 1903, it's basically like Gossip Girl. You change the costumes, you take away the horse carriages, and you add edits.
Totally. Also, I noticed. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, you tapped out.
Important thing, but no, but seriously.
Yeah. Sorry, could you repeat that?
Oh, sorry. One of us is breaking up. I think we might not have heard what you said after you said Gossip Girl.
Oh, yeah. Just, Edith Wharton and how timeless her work is. It's almost like an episode of Gossip Girl when you read her novels. They're still as relevant today, basically.
Nice. Also, I'm glad that you...
And of course, Amy Tan. Amy Tan was a huge influence on my writing,
Nice. Have you met her? I'm sure you have.
I have, yeah.
I can see you guys really getting along well. She's fun.
Yeah.
Okay, we have another question from Macy, which is, what is your writing process for coming up with characters? I know that it's kind of a very broad question, but I think you guys will be able to do it justice. Heather, do you want to start?
Sure. I don't know if my answer is going to be very satisfying because I don't think there's a wrong way. But for what we're doing, we outline our books, and so we kind of know who our central characters are. But I think what we've often done is, as we've started writing, we've sort of stumbled into their essences a bit more deeply than we knew them in the outline, or we've added a character. Like, I think a lot of it is, when you're going, you just sort of feel like you start to feel what kind of an influence you need. What kind of a friend, what kind of a social buffer does this person need in that situation, or what kind of a so when we were divining the like Bex's and Nick's group of friends, we knew that there was going to be a guy named Clive, and that he was going to be kind of slick, and we knew what his storyline was. But a lot of the other, and we knew there was going to be somebody who was a fashion designer, who was she was the embodiment of the friend who, once you become famous, feels like she's got it made and that she's going to get all the favors. So we knew she was going to be there, and the rest we just kind of took as we were writing scenes, and we kind of went with what felt fun, which maybe is not the most scientific way to do it, but I think it's okay to have good broad strokes for your characters if you need them. And then I think once you start actually writing from their point of view, writing their voices, that's when you get to know them. And so that's when we do a lot of our work. But, I will say I'm dying to know Kevin's answer to this question, because I feel like you have so many characters in your books. I keep imagining that you have like one of those murder evidence boards on your wall, like 600 names and safety pins, and like this person's been with this person and this person and this person, and like just a giant, because I don't know how on earth you would keep track of all of that otherwise, which I know is a little off the point, but still.
So I don't have any sort of filing system or board whatsoever. It's all in here. Amazing. In my crazy little brain. But I will tell you, I cheat because I basically, for each character, I have a real person inspiration, or an amalgam of several real people that I start building the character off of. So that's how I cheat. I'll say, oh, this person's based on this real person. But as I write about these characters, as I write the story, they evolve and they really come into their own. They really become their true fictionalized selves, and they start speaking back to me and telling me how they want to present and how they want to evolve and what they want to say. But that's my process. I always start with a person or a couple of people that I can use as the inspiration point to launch a character when I write.
How often has someone been correct in recognizing themselves in one of your characters?
Knocking on wood, never. It's never happened. Yeah. I do a lot of changing and disguising, because I never want to have someone be recognized, or God forbid them recognize themselves. Okay. So it's never happened. But then there are a lot of people I hear that go around claiming to be in my books. When my producers for Crazy Rich Asians, the movie, first visited Hong Kong and Singapore for the first time to do a scouting trip, they met about like 30 different women that claimed to be Astrid. Like, they claimed to be the inspiration for Astrid. So I just found that very funny.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, none of them were right, of course, but
Astrid, we obviously have the shortcut of the royal family as well. We were basing it on, Will and Kate a little bit. Like, we could take rough outlines of them, but then obviously we had to let that go a little bit, because what you don't want is someone reading your book and being like, well, Bex did this, but Kate would never do that, or Freddie did this, but Harry would never do that. So like, we kind of had to start there because it was the inspiration for the story, and then we had to make sure that the ways that we colored them in and sort of got to know them made them just different enough that people would not think of them as those three people, or not think of our Eleanor, our queen, as Elizabeth. We had to make sure we did just enough to scoop them up with us, and part of that was getting over the hump of ourselves thinking of them that way. We had to be like, well, it doesn't matter what Kate would do in this situation, because this isn't Kate, and we can't worry about whether people are going to be annoyed that this character did that, because she's not Kate.
Can I ask a quick question of Heather and Jessica?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Were you guys always interested in the royal family, or was this a fairly recent thing? Like, what made you decide to begin writing these books based on, or inspired by the royal family?
I were always interested in them as well, like as I said earlier, sort of like as a soap opera. I wouldn't say that we were like big royal fans exactly, but I did follow them as like a pop culture or like as celebrities, I guess, as you put it. You know, how often was Princess Diana on the cover of People magazine? Thousands of times. And I got up and I watched Fergie and Andrew's wedding because I love a spectacle. So I think that it wasn't a new area of interest exactly. But the way we came about writing the book was honestly, Heather and I were just talking to our book agent one day about, I guess Kate Middleton had done something that day. I don't even remember what. And one of us just said, you know, she makes it look very easy, but I'm sure underneath the water, you know, it's like that old saying, the swan is gliding across, or the duck is gliding across the water very smoothly, but underneath there's paddling like hell. And so, you know, we were just like, it must be much more difficult than it appears. Someone said, someone should write that book. And we were like, oh my God, we should write it. Let's write that book. So it was honestly just in the course of a conversation. It's not like, I wish I had a better story where like Heather and we got hit on the head and we came to and we had invented the flux capacitor, but it was just in the course of convo.
Have you met her?
Kate Middleton?
Mm-hmm.
No. Have you?
I have. And the interesting thing I will tell you, since you haven't met her, is that in person, she is exponentially more beautiful than you can possibly imagine. She is so unphotogenic and so unvideogenic. But when you meet her in the flesh, you're like, wow, I get it now. You know, because she is just physically beautiful in a way that doesn't capture on camera. And then there's that glow and that spirit. So, yeah.
Good intel. Thank you.
Yeah.
What context did you meet her in, Kevin?
It was in London, of course. Yeah. But I'll tell you guys offline. I'm happy to talk about it offline. But thank you. Yeah.
You're good.
Yeah, we have not. We, in fact, we're so far removed from being cool enough to do that when we went to England to do our Royal We research tour, because Buckingham Palace, I don't know what it is now, but at the time it was only open, you know, for a specific time over the summer and a very short period of time over Christmas, whenever the Queen was either at Balmoral or Sandringham or just somewhere else. And I shouldn't say pretty sure this is 100% my fault. So we booked the tour. It was the only day of our trip that we could see it. We showed up. We were like, oh, you know, we're early. Let's go. We went and killed a bunch of time and then came back and found out we were half an hour late and that the ticket time that we thought was 2:30 was actually 2:00. And we just went, and I think the guards were like, oh, these sad American girls. Like, oh, the tragedy. And we were just like, oh my God, we blew it. So we had to go, and they took pity on us, and we killed a bunch more time and came back. Like, everybody who was there for their tour checked in. And at the very end, they were like, we can take 2 more. Come on in. And we were like, thank you so much. But like, we are so uncool that we almost completely blew the tourist experience of Buckingham Palace, much less actually meeting a.
We're not meeting Kate Middleton. We almost cannot make it onto the tour to see her grandmother-in-law's home.
Well, we'll chat offline, and I cannot wait to read your books. So congratulations on them. Like being a writer, I have no time to read other books myself. I'm sure you know the feeling, but I always see your books. It's like, I gotta get it. So tonight I'm gonna like buy them instantly and start.
Yes, that's what we like to hear.
Yeah.
Yes. Just 2 more questions from readers. Next one from Nicole, this is for Jessica and Heather. You're both great writers, and I really enjoyed The Royal We and The Heir Affair. As a fellow book lover and British monarchy addict, can we expect another book in the series?
That's a wonderful question, and I feel like our agent probably has the same question. Nicole, is that really Brittany? Well, thank you for starters. It's a really lovely compliment. I think the greatest compliment is when somebody has spent that much time with your characters and doesn't want to turn around and throw the book into the sea. So I'm so glad people would want there to be another one. We were delighted that anyone wanted a second one. Our answer for this, I keep coming back to like childbirth analogies, I guess, but it's kind of like we spent so much time, and then this one, we were working on this one, we were cooking it up, and finally it came out, and we were just so physically spent that we were like, we just need our bodies to recover for a second. Like my circulation needs to come back before we can even really think about whether there would be a third one. But so the short answer is never say never. And I think the long answer is that like, I still can't sit for too long without getting dead legs. And so I need to get to work my circulation back up because we wrote a lot.
Do you want to write
now? Yeah.
I think I missed your question. I'm sorry.
Oh, I said, do you want to write another one?
I mean, we're definitely going to write another book. We might write something else first if we do a third one. I feel like we might need a little creative palate cleanser. And I'm sure Kevin can totally agree with this after having written 3 books, that like once you've spent that much time with those people, you love them and they are your creations, but you might want to write about some other people for a while.
Totally. Okay, last question from Connor. So he says, the romance genre is stereotypically thought to be geared towards women. Can you all speak to this and provide insight on how we can break this taboo? So I would say, I don't know that I would totally qualify your books as being in the romance genre, but let's just say the genre of delicious books about rich people are stereotypically thought to be geared towards women. I do think this is a good question. Yeah, do you think it's a taboo? Do you care? Do you tell us everything? Kevin, you want to start?
Yeah, I personally wouldn't call it a taboo. I just think it's the reality of the marketplace, in that even if you write fiction, more women read fiction than men. That's the plain truth. Unless it's a crime fiction novel. There's very specific genres that men read. So in the first place, there are more women who read fiction than men. And then if you sort of subcategorize and you're writing about like fun, glamorous, frothy, beautiful things, you do tend to get, to veer even more. It's interesting because in the US, I would say probably 75% of my readers are women. In Asia, that is not the case at all. In Asia, it's about 50-50. So I think maybe there's a bias in this country, culturally, like guys don't read fiction as much, and especially if it's marketed like it looks like chick lit, they won't pick it up. Whereas in Asia, guys don't have those issues, at least my readers don't.
I think that is very true, and toxic masculinity strikes again for America.
There's a lot about the biases people bring into it. I always think that with young adult as well. Like, I understand the name of the genre and I get it, but to me, it's so much more about the age of the protagonist and what they're going through, and that, you don't have to be a young adult to read young adult. You don't have to be like anything. You don't have to be any one thing in order to be attracted to a certain kind of book. And I think it's a lot more about the readers sort of getting over that within themselves and being willing to find that like a book that might have a romance in it might also have a lot of other richness to it, humor, cultural commentary, whatever, that you should open yourself up to. So yeah, I do think the readers kind of need to get over it, is what I would say.
I mean, and I think that would be my advice as well, that if you are a man who likes what would be considered romance or contemporary women's fiction, talk about it. I think it's only going to seem less, I don't think people should ever feel bad about reading whatever they want. But I also don't think it's going to seem less taboo until there are men who are like, hey, I just read this great Jasmine Guillory book and I loved it. So you should read it too. So I think some of that's going to have to come from people who are unhappy with the status quo, as far as this goes a little bit. Like, if you're a dude who loves books about rich people having problems, tell your dude friends and just normalize it.
Yeah.
I saw this phenomenon where, women would start reading my books here in this country, And then they would hand it off to their boyfriends or husbands. And the guys would start really getting into it. Because I would meet, people would say, oh my God, my husband is obsessed with your book because I left it on the nightstand. Or a guy would come up to me and go, oh wow, I never imagined I'd like your book, and I do. I never set out to write chick lit. I still don't consider my work chick lit. To me, I wrote a book about a whole family. And to me, the protagonist is Nick, not Rachel. But it's interesting, what marketing departments and PR people do. And I never imagined I would have a book where there's a beautiful silhouette of a woman with earrings on the cover. That wasn't how I ever pictured entering the marketplace. But I'm happy it happened because we sold books. It found a readership that it might not otherwise have. But yeah, I think, attitudes do have to change. And, people need to stop siloing books into complete categories, just like with YA, because I sometimes read YA as well.
Of course.
Totally.
Yeah. And it's really only men who are avoiding books because they think that it's, not tough enough. They're the only ones who are really losing out.
Chick lit, and that's not anything against you, Kevin. I use that word too. Like, it's an actual genre name that is in publishing. And I think it's almost like how people get mad when they watch a reality TV show and they're like, but it's not reality, it's edited. And I'm like, yeah, it's because it's a bad name for the genre. Like, no one is trying to claim that like a reality show is 100% like raw and real and there's no editing. There's writers on a reality show. Sure, someone has to be putting this stuff together, and like it's a misnomer that just kind of took off and now it's a thing. And I think, and so some people use it against it. And I feel like chick lit has become that thing where it's been used to dismiss bodies of work that I don't think deserve to, like, by whole sections of people. That I think it's like, we once worked with somebody who, when was basically like, chick lit doesn't sell. And we were sort of like, what does that mean? Like, does that mean books by women don't sell? Does that mean books about, like, what is that bias? And like, why is that a thing? Obviously, it's also not true.
We also no longer work with this person. So just like, why I
feel like somehow these genre titles that become weaponized against the books in them and the authors in them are really unproductive. And I would love for that one to be treated with a little more nuance.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Absolutely.
And romance. And the thing is, I love romance books, and like, I love a good bodice ripper. And I think I think sometimes people think that if in order to be a romance novel, you must be a bodice ripper. And it's like, no, then those have their place and they're great and I love them. But like, there's other kinds of romance too. It gets everything. Everything doesn't need to fit tightly into a box.
Yeah, I think we are hopefully like entering an age where we stop categorizing things in many different fields. And I think that, only ends up being good for everybody. The idea that like men get to feel a full range of their emotions is only good for all of humanity, Yes. Well, hopefully we will meet again in that brighter time. But until then, we've reached the end of our panel. But thank you so much, Jessica, Heather, and Kevin, for being here. And everyone out there watching, please remember to support your local indie bookstores. They really need your help right now. And support the store in whatever community that you're in. If you're here in Los Angeles, our partner for this event is Vromans, so please buy these books from them. And have a great night, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you, guys.